This is The Data Slice, hosted by the Data Science Alliance. It's where we sit down to talk all things data, AI, and tech, any way you slice it. I'm Callan Hobman, and joining us today is Vitor Carvalho. He is a Principal Applied Science Manager at Microsoft and has lots of experience with AI, data science, tech, everything in between. And he's here to talk about his career path, advice on getting different degrees like a PhD, which he has in computer science from Carnegie Mellon University, and lots of different experiences. We're going to talk about responsible data science, responsible AI, and all of that. So Vitor, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm doing great. I'm great. Thanks.
Yeah, well, we're really excited to hear about your experience. I know you have lots of different experiences from large companies to startups and all of that. Maybe to begin, could you first just tell us a little bit about, for you, how did it all begin for you with your interest in pursuing the career you have now when it comes to AI and data and all that?
It wasn't something straightforward by any means. So I think I was in the early days when I was back in high school. I was pretty lost. Didn't know what I wanted to do. And after a few iterative conversations, I ended up doing some entrance exams to electrical engineering back in Brazil. And when I started, I had very low expectations. Didn't know what I was going to expect. But at that time I was awarded by the state government a scholarship called Scientist of the Future. And that scholarship put me in touch. I was going to be mentored or tutored by professors doing real research, PhD level professors doing real research. And that change, that opportunity for somebody who just left high school was incredible. I actually had amazing supervision from wonderful professors in my home school, access to postdocs and people doing doctorate degrees, going really deep in physics, in electrical engineering. And I learned a lot from that experience. The experience was extended over the years. We continued that kind of scholarship. In Brazil, there's something called Scientific Initiation Scholarship. I continue over all the years of my undergrad. And during all those years, I was always part of a laboratory, always checking on research papers from people. I ended up publishing a few papers. And nowadays, I think that basically propelled me in the direction of working with researchy topics in my life, always trying to find, to work on topics that are closer to what's the latest that's being developed. I was extremely lucky to have wonderful professors like Professor Tabosa, Professor Ricardo Campelo, for wonderful tutors. And that kind of supervision does make a difference in the life of a young engineer. So that's what happened in the early days. And that's why I eventually ended up deciding to do a PhD, because of that early influence. After those years, I graduated and I went to do a master's degree in telecommunications, where I worked on CDMA. This is still in Brazil, in a bigger city. And after that, I got a job at Ericsson. And I had a lot of training here, initial training here in San Diego, as well as in Boulder, Colorado. Came back to Brazil, and a few years later decided to finally do the PhD that I had in mind all those years. So I applied. I was accepted in Carnegie Mellon. When I joined, my intentions were to actually do speech recognition and study speech recognition at the time. But due to funding issues, I ended up joining a project related to machine learning for email understanding, trying to automate communications via email somehow. And it worked really well. It was my introduction to machine learning, to this whole field that grew so much in the last decades. And from there, from during those years doing the PhD in Carnegie Mellon, I had a wonderful advisor, William Cohen, and I did an internship in Microsoft Research back in the day. And when I graduated, eventually, I went directly to Microsoft to work. And so that was the transition. During some years, during the PhD, I seriously considered becoming an academic or a professor. But by the last 2 years or so, it became clear that my personal interests were more aligned to developing systems and writing code than actually, being involved in academia directly. So it was easy for me after a few years to get to that decision. But I understand that decision can be complicated for people who are going through it now. And then, after Microsoft, I did join some startup. I, work in other companies like Snapchat and Intuit and Qualcomm. And here I am back again at Microsoft, working on interesting topics, responsible AI and large language models and so on. And that's it. That's a very brief overview of, of my life career-wise.
I know you mentioned it can definitely be complicated to decide whether or not to get a PhD. And then even once you do decide, it can be quite a journey. It obviously worked out for you. Do you have thoughts on that? For someone who might be weighing whether or not to get a PhD, do you have advice for making that decision?
Yes, I do. I have to say first that all the things I say here are my opinion only. They have nothing to do with my employers. So this is based on my personal experience, and my goal here is just to try to share what I went through so that people can perhaps resonate with what I said. So if you want, regarding a PhD, especially in the US, if you want to be an academic or a professor, it makes a lot of sense to try to do a PhD. There's an investment of time and obviously, but it is a good, in my opinion, it's a good direction to go. Obviously, you can be an academic and a researcher or a professor without a PhD, but it typically takes you further if you have a PhD degree. The experiences you go through a PhD are going really deep on a specific research topic. They really carry on. You'll be able to guide people or mentor people later much better as an advisor, as a professor. Now, if you are unsure if you want to be an academic or a professor, if you prefer to write code than to write thesis proposals, for example, then you might consider very carefully, if you are on the fence, I might consider very carefully if you want to do a PhD or not. There are certain trade-offs that you should know. And I would encourage everyone who is on that particular situation to think carefully, why are you doing a PhD? What is actually motivating you? Because it's not a decision that is backed by, let's say, more money or more opportunities later on. On the contrary, chances are, because you stayed longer in a PhD in a very specific topic, you're going to try to find a job that is super specific associated with that topic, which is unlikely to be plentiful. So chances are you will have to work on something else if you eventually join industry. So another thing to know too is that the process of becoming a PhD is there's a lot of attrition to it. What I heard is that 50% of folks who are accepted into the PhD program in the US, they ended up dropping along the way and they don't finish it for whatever reasons. It is a process that is, it's kind of like a marathon in a way. You have to develop your own self-motivation. You have to go after certain topics. You have to get to the top of this mountain of knowledge and contribute to it somehow. And that process that may take years, 5 years, 7, 8, that takes a toll on people, not only a financial toll, but a personal toll as well. Mental health becomes a serious issue to your PhD years. Finding that motivation, seeing the life of everybody around you changing quickly while you're still stuck on a topic and you don't make progress on that topic can be really, really challenging for a lot of people. So what I would suggest is for anybody who's on the fence, just take a deep breath, try to find your inner motivation. What exactly are you trying to do before you jump into a PhD? So a PhD is a wonderful thing to do, but I highly recommend you jumping into it if you are sure about it. And another thing that's really important to you in the PhD is that it's not only a topic that motivates you. I hope the topic is also growing in interest in the economy overall. And more important than that, I try to find a very good PhD advisor. And the best way to find one is actually looking around, seeing how they advise other people in the past. I think those ingredients should be something that should be on your head if you're deciding to do a PhD. With that said, this is my personal opinion, my personal experience. People obviously go through different perspectives on the same issue.
Mm-hmm. Really helpful to hear personal experiences. I think, like you said, there is the reality to it. I think sometimes people it sounds cool in theory. It sounds like an impressive thing to pursue, but there's so much reality. It is real life. It takes years, like you said. It affects your personal life. It's a commitment. So really helpful to hear your experience with that. I know you mentioned from your PhD, it led into Microsoft in the beginning, but then you did switch from Microsoft to a startup for a bit. What was that like going from, a well-known corporate company to startup? Did you have a good experience doing that?
I did. I did have a very good experience. This is, again, something that can vary. Different people have different experiences, but I had a very good experience. In a smaller company, you have so much more flexibility to do what you want to do. Like, you are less constrained in terms of decision making. You actually can access the higher decision makers, CEO of the company, very easily. For people who are really, really motivated, really creative, and like to come up with new ideas to solve problems that are in front of them, people who like to integrate brand new solutions that came out from academia or from another lab into a product that has already users but can be made much better, you can do that. You can have significantly more impact in a startup, in a small company. That is definitely true. It is also a place where, especially if the company is growing, you will be given more opportunities to grow your career as well compared to a larger company. So I think the growth is associated with your career path and career growth in many ways. I had a very good experience. In a way, I recommend it because you need to be extremely resourceful, given that there isn't that many people around you to help in doing things. So you have to do a lot of different things, and you have to learn how to do those things to the best of your abilities, and get involved in all sorts of dimensions associated with the work that you could not be involved in a bigger company, like hiring and strategizing and planning things planning products at a much deeper level than what you were allowed in a bigger company. So it can be a wonderful opportunity. I recommend, especially for people who have that that curiosity in the back of their heads.
Mm-hmm. Kind of speaking of that type of experience, would you say that applies to roles that you pick, especially maybe if we're talking about students early in their careers? Should they be looking more for that type of experience where they're getting that growth and those opportunities versus looking for a certain title or a certain company name?
Yeah, the number one thing that, and this is again my opinion, the number one thing that people should be optimizing for in their career, especially early career, is in growth, is in learning and growth. You obviously can go for a seemingly bigger title in the beginning. But typically, from my experience at least, it's about the growth of the company, the growth of the area of the company that you're working on, the growth of the technologies that are powering the things that you're working on. Those are the things that over time seem to provide more rewards in people's careers, more than the job title, more than the immediate cash compensation that you receive. Some of these things are a longer term, right? Yes, it is true that for a person who's graduating now, getting a job in a very well-recognized company with a powerful brand name, it really helps, right? It basically puts like a stamp of like competence on this person. Oh, the person is able to get into this difficult, important company. Chances are this person is qualified for many things. But it's not necessarily the best path forward for you. So it's hard to know what will be the best path forward for you. But my recommendation in general is that try to go for things that are growing more and where you're going to learn more from, especially if you happen to know people that are already inside a particular company.
When it comes to applying for those positions, whether it's a company, startup, any type of role, is there anything specific for either a resume or maybe in an interview, anything that you really look for that would really impress you, or vice versa, something that would really kind of turn you off from a candidate?
Yeah, yes, there are lots of things that can impress, interviewers. I think in terms of I mean, I'm pretty sure these things have been said before, but nowadays, if you can somehow use your network that you have, or alumni network, or any sort of network information that you have, to reach out to the hiring manager or the person who's behind this particular open position, that is really good. It's much easier that way than applying blindly to a job post, right? As people start to interview, it is okay to do multiple interviews, even if you feel that it's going to be just for training for you. And it's okay. It takes a little while to get rolling in your interview skills. So you need to practice that somehow. You can practice obviously with friends, but it's much better if you practice in a real interview, especially if you're not that invested into the output of that interview. The other things I would say is, it is okay to go for a job that is like a stepping stone to where you eventually want to go. Perfectly fine. You're learning your skills along the way. You interact with people. You interact with other, tangential areas that can help you grow. So you don't necessarily need to be, giving up on everything because you didn't get that dream job. There are lots of jobs out there that will be able to make you grow and learn over time. And as you're going through those, the interview process and so on, get ready. Like, study up what the company that you're interviewing for is doing. Come prepared with a list of questions, like good questions that you thought about carefully. How would you improve a particular product of that company? I mean, be prepared to ask insightful questions, because your questions will be considered during your application review. And yeah, I mean, show up with energy and trying to be part of the team, show that you're really, really interested in that position. And remember one thing too, is that job titles are all relative. Different companies can have pretty much absolutely different job titles for the same kind of work that's going to be done. So don't be completely dissuaded by a bigger or a smaller, seemingly smaller job title. It's all about the work that you do and the people around you and what you're going to learn towards the direction that you want to grow. Yeah, so I think in terms of what you should not do, right? What will not be impressive in someone's interview, I think it's the opposite of that. Somebody who shows up without getting prepared, the person doesn't know what the company does, the person has no questions to ask to the interviewers, not showing interest per se. That's a big turnoff, right? We look for people who actually have active contributions in all sorts of things, in projects that the person has developed, in open source code that the person has contributed to, any sort of that piece of evidence that grows your even if you just graduated, but if you have that, it helps in building up your portfolio of interesting things that can catch the eye of somebody inside the company. If you don't have that, if you cannot talk about the things that you've done in the past, it makes it harder to stand out. If you publish papers, if you receive any sort of awards, if you can be recommended by any person, any professor in the field, those things do happen to help.
Speaking of building resumes, building portfolios, like you said, I know part of the DSA community is students. We have lots of students that come through as interns or attend our events, and they talk about they're looking for that real world experience to add to their resumes. Is there anything specific that you recommend doing to really build skills outside of the classroom?
Yeah, if you can do internships, you should do internships, right? So it is, in a way, even the way that we provide visas for grad students, you have a particular number of months, or if I remember correctly, number of months that you can do internships during your course, doing your degree. So it is a wonderful thing to get more exposure in the real world if you're looking for a non-academic job, right? As I mentioned, for the folks who are more in the technology side of the world, participating or contributing to open source projects as a contributor in any way, shape, or form is great. If you have a hobby, for example, and you manage to get a technology and you integrate that to improve your hobby somehow, and you post that in your LinkedIn as a little whatever package or a project, that is great. It shows that you are really, really interested in improving your particular hobby using a particular technology, which makes you stand out. It makes you unique, and it's really, really good. And one thing to keep in mind is you do have to do your homework, not only on the area that you are an expert in, but also on what's going on in the industry around that particular company. Like there are news about acquisitions and privacy changes and legal changes, whatever it is. You need to be on top of that. If that company is going through that in the wave of that news, you need to understand like, oh, okay, this is changing and I'm wondering what's going to happen. That will be a wonderful source of questions for you to have for that particular interviewer if you're just watching the news and the developments around it. Doing internships and being proactive and showing that you have interest in it, you can contribute to projects and open source things outside your degree. That's a wonderful thing. For the most part, the grades that you have are not going to be influential during the hiring process.
Right, yeah. Right. Classroom only takes you so far, definitely. Yeah. So we've talked a lot about getting the job, preparing for getting the job. Once you are in the job, though, do you have any advice, whether we're talking about, a student, first job out of college, or maybe a working professional 20 years into their career and they switch jobs? Do you have advice for really standing out and prospering in a job once you have it?
I do. A few things. Let's say, I think after you get that first job, right? I know getting the first job is really hard, but after you get it, especially if you work in technology, you should know there's never a boring day. Things will be changing, so you have to continue to learn forever. There's no way out of this in technology. And one thing that you should also be prepared, because things are changing in technology at a speed that other areas don't change as fast. You should be ready for the bumps on the road as well. Like there will be reorgs, there will be layoffs, there will be acquisitions. Those, for the most part, will be beyond your control. And it's not about you, it's about the market and about where the products of the company are in that market. So be prepared for those bumps. They will come. And how you react to those bumps actually can be beneficial for your career in the long term. So being resilient, right, in that regard. I think I would say that, especially for foreign students, the work in the US to prosper, once you have the job, it's all about what you do and how you do it. People don't really care about where you're from or anything outside your personal life. And in the department of what you do to get ahead, it's keep in mind. I mean, it's the same thing. It's the getting things done. Like, don't get distracted easily. Focus on the work and delivering the work. Focus on making your manager look good through your work, right? And try to iterate quickly, knowing that perfection is the enemy of the good. So do the best the work that you can, and keep in mind that what you do is what actually is going to make you stay in that particular position and grow. And another thing that is really important, not as important if you go through an academic career, but in a corporate career, it's extremely important, is how you communicate that work, because you will be required to work in a team. You will have to have, people around you, and you need to communicate well with all of them, communicate up, like selling the work that you're doing. Sometimes you have to explain the work that you're doing to other teams, other locations, other groups. That communication aspect of the work over time becomes extremely important for you to prosper in the work. So it's a little bit different in academia. You can go a very long ways without having to communicate with hundreds of people. Chances are in an office environment, you will have to communicate with hundreds of people. Mm-hmm. There are things that might help as well, like sometimes opportunities are going to come for growth and they are not in your location. They are somewhere else. So if you really want to grow, be prepared to relocate if necessary. Sometimes you have to relocate to a different country and come back. It's all part of the game. But overall, keeping an eye on the growing areas around you and making sure your work is being delivered and you're delivering this well, communicating it well. I think that is the North Star that you should follow in that sense.
I really like how you phrased it earlier of needing to always being willing to learn forever. You're always learning. There's never necessarily that end destination in a way. It's never like you've made it, you're done, you're at the top. There's always, like you said, there's going to be something new. There's going to be a change in the company or anything like that that you have to be
Always.
prepared for.
Yeah, in technology, things change very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Many of the professions we have now did not exist like 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
Yeah. Well, kind of speaking of, I wanted to ask you about how you've kind of seen the role of data and AI evolve over the years. Definitely much more relevant than it was, even just 5-10 years ago. How have you seen throughout your career and your education, how have you seen data science and AI, and especially, the ethics, the talks about ethics surrounding those things, how have you seen them change and become a bigger part of the industry over the years?
Yeah, so it's night and day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where we are now to where we were, let's say, 20 years ago. Nowadays, we have a lot of these data sciences, machine learning models or AI models making decisions, significant decisions in your day-to-day life. I mean, I was lucky to get into like a PhD topic that actually has applications directly to millions of people and seeing the area of machine learning and AI, data science, taking so much more prominence all over, not only in applications in the cloud, but also like legislation, right? I mean, people are discussing the reach of these technologies, where they should go and how they should do it. It's been a great ride. Over the last 10, 15 years, you see the growth of cloud computing, the growth of social media, the growth of wireless, all sorts of applications in wireless working really well from your phone. And more recently, you see the developments of these incredible neural networks and large language models. They're starting to actually be part of the day-to-day life of a lot of people, especially office workers and students and so on. So it's been a great ride. But with this growth, with the pervasive aspect of these predictions coming out, there are all sorts of consequences that also bubble up to our attention, like things like privacy, and more recently, things related to responsible AI, right? Using these technologies in a responsible way. It is great to see us as a community working harder and harder on these issues, trying to find solutions, raising realistic questions on the reach on these technologies and how things are not working well and how they are working well. It's great to see companies trying to improve them as much as possible. And nowadays, governments getting involved and participating and legislating and mandating certain solutions. This is really good. And I do expect for the next years, same thing will continue. There will be efforts in all these sides of the spectrum related to AI and machine learning and data science. And yeah, I can only see this growing. I would, at least I would think those are very promising areas for a person to invest. If you are, finishing your undergrad, you're getting into a master's degree, you need to choose a topic. Those will be relevant topics moving forward. How the technology interacts, touches the last mile, the humans that are suffering or going through the consequence of decisions of those models.
Would you say you think there will always be, though, no matter how much the tech evolves and advances, there will always be that human aspect and that need for the human aspect?
Yes, I think so. We will. Automation is going to continue to grow. We're going to automate more and more layers of the technology stack. But in the end of the day, the automation will have a particular target, which is you, right? The final consumer, the final population. And that part, how a technology or the interface interacts with the final user, that part is really hard to automate. Humans are really hard to please. and chances are in that universe of that that surface of contact between humans and technology decisions, that's when a lot of the attention and a lot of the work will happen in the coming years. That's what I imagine.
With all of that changing and growing, there are, the talks about the ethics of this. I know people are concerned about the way this tech could grow. What has your experience been like with seeing that push for responsible AI and responsible data usage?
Yeah, it is a very timely topic. You see a lot of attention, particularly since the developments of very serious large language models in the world. The way I see it, it will continue to grow, as I mentioned before. It will be a fundamental aspect of every decision making, every new model being released, every set of legislation being published, how the human aspects, how the responsible AI part of it will be accounted for. And at least the way I see it in three different dimensions. One is in the dimension of people describing a new RAI harm, educating people, unveiling, testing these things, measuring, discovering new harms that were not thought about before because we didn't have a particular new technology doing those kinds of decision making in that new medium. The second area I see a lot of thrust and energy being devoted to is in legislation and frameworks and guidelines and crafting all that body of work to guide countries, to guide companies, and protect institutions from abusive use of technology from an RAI perspective. So, and the third one is for the folks who are creating the guardrails, right? So people who are creating the technical solutions to contain those harms or to reduce the probability of one of those harms creating having terrible consequences. So for the folks who are creating these solutions to try to mitigate those harms, typically they're working in companies. That is also a very important avenue of development. The three things are important, right? The describing, educating, and unveiling new harms, legislating, as well as mitigating and creating solutions for those things. You can try to find some inspiration on the way that we have evolved protections in driving in cars over the years and what we're trying to do now with automated driving in cars. It is an iterative process. It's going to take time, and all these different components of society will have to interact to come up with a solution that is good enough for us to live with. Even though I know it's going to be hard, I'm excited about it. I think this is the right way to go. Like, we living with these guardrails in a way that it makes sense for most people. It will be wonderful to watch in the coming years how this will play out.
Do you have any tips for staying up to date? Like you said, we kind of just need to watch what happens. Do you have any specific ways that you like to kind of stay in the know about the industry and what's going on?
It is right now. It's really, really hard to to catch up on everything that is happening. Things are moving really, really fast. It's overwhelming even for people who are in working on that day and night. The way I do it, I try to listen to as many relevant podcasts as I can. There are some nice newsletters that are published once a week with a summary of the major developments on a particular area. But it is becoming the volume of knowledge being produced. For example, you cannot keep up with all the papers being published in this area anymore. You just can't. You need a way to summarize that development to you. In a way, it is a good sign. It's a sign that there's a lot of energy in this area, and keeping up with it is hard. So the way I do it, and I can only recommend this, is trying to find channels that summarize that developments to you. Otherwise, it's overwhelming.
You can get lost in it.
Yeah.
Well, in light of, like we said, so much is changing, lots to keep an eye on. Is there anything that you are especially excited about? Any innovations or trends that you've seen that you personally just feel really optimistic about?
I am very excited and hopeful that we will have fundamental scientific breakthroughs coming out of these models, like a new theorem in mathematics, a new polymer in chemistry that can 10x energy storage, any sort of fundamental understanding in physics that gets clarified through analyzing a lot of data by one of these models. It will be a fantastic thing for me to watch. I'm excited about that, the fundamental aspects of it. Well, we talked about a lot about the human aspects of it, obviously the responsible AI part. I mean, excited about to see what the countries are going to come up with in terms of legislation and guardrails and mandates too. But as a scientist, I get more excited about the technical breakthroughs that might come out of this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you think that your past self, maybe think back to when you were an undergrad, young student, what is it like to look back? Did you have any idea that the tech would be where it is today?
No, absolutely not. And chances are, we now don't know what's going to be ahead 20 years from now by any means. By some metrics, things are accelerating. Like innovation is accelerating. And as we have these models that automate part of cognition and decision-making and exploration, models that have extremely, almost infinite memory, chances are discoveries are coming our way in the next 5, 10, 15 years. We just cannot even fathom at the moment or predict. So I'm excited about that, yeah. But no, to answer your question, I would have no idea. Even like the pervasiveness of cell phones, I would have no idea this would happen like 20 years ago. It is just, it's incredible to see the developments in these last years. And yeah, I expect more. I'll be watching and contributing.
Yeah, like you said, there is always going to be something else, and it is crazy to think, who knows, 20 years from now, what we'll look back on and say, we had no idea.
I had no idea.
No idea.
Even job titles, job descriptions, the work itself might change in a way that you would never imagine.
Well, we will just have to keep an eye out.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, talking about all of your amazing advice, your experiences, your insight, really exciting things going on in the industry. And we'll have to stay in touch. We'll have to bring you back on the podcast. Maybe in 20 years, we'll talk about we'll reflect on our episode. Well, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me. I hope this can be helpful to some folks out there.
If you enjoyed this podcast, give it a rating, subscribe to us on your podcast streaming platforms, and share it with a friend. Plus, follow the Data Science Alliance on all of your favorite social media platforms. The Data Science Alliance is a 501c3 nonprofit that you can support. You can do a one-time donation, monthly or annual donation by becoming a member. You can volunteer your time on our projects or attend our events. We have lots going on here at our location in San Diego, California, happening every single month. So get involved. Go to our website, datasciencealliance.org, to learn more about how you can get to know us better. But otherwise, we'll see you here next time on The Data Slice.